Hello, my name is Sian Kent and welcome to Boolers TV. Boolers is a firm of chartered financial planners and we are specialists in pensions. With the increasing interest in pensions freedoms, we have put together a 3-part mini-series, Defined Benefits in Focus, to help explore in more detail options to consider when looking at defined benefit pensions. I'm joined today by my colleagues Carol and Chris, 2 of our pension transfer specialists, who will look to highlight the areas to consider when looking at defined benefit pensions. The series will cover what to think about if you are considering a potential transfer, the need for advice and the process itself, and to begin with, what is a defined benefit pension? Carol, what is a defined benefit pension?
So a defined benefit pension is a company pension that you have accumulated through often years and maybe a long number of years of service for the company. And what makes it a defined benefit pension is exactly that your benefits when you get to retirement are certain, are fixed, are defined.
How exactly are my benefits worked out?
It depends really. It depends on the scheme itself, but largely it's to do with how many years you've worked at the firm, what your salary was during that period of time. And it can be split into various different areas. It can be split into pre or post 97 and GMP benefits. So it can get quite complicated, and that's why advice is often needed.
Thank you. I've received a statement and the benefits and income look the same as it did when I left the scheme 20 years ago. Why is this?
Yeah, that's because when you leave a pension scheme, your benefits at date of leaving are crystallised, are normally put in a statement and sent to you. And when you get annual statements from your pension scheme, those benefits are still referred to as the benefits that you had at the point of leaving. That doesn't mean that when you get to retirement, you will still get that level of benefit. What happens is that they're increased or revalued, often in line with a factor such as inflation or a fixed amount, so that the benefits that you had at date of leaving are increased up to the point of retirement. So at retirement, you will get the increased value and not the value that you were entitled to at date of leaving.
Will I have to pay tax on my pension?
An element of it will be tax-free normally, although you have to give up some pension rights to receive that in most schemes. The income that you receive via the pension, once that commences, will be taxed as income. So you will be subject to income tax at the normal rates. So there can sometimes be an issue, you know, if you've got income from elsewhere, it can push your tax coding up, and you can be paying more tax overall than if you were just receiving that pension in its own right.
What happens if I decide that I want to take my pension earlier or perhaps later?
Mm-hmm. Well, each scheme will have a normal retirement date for you, which says, OK, under normal circumstances, this is the date at which we expect you to take benefits. That's normally 60, sometimes 62, sometimes 65. So that's your normal retirement date. But most schemes allow you to take benefits before your normal retirement date, or retiring early, as you say. What we'd normally expect to see is that your benefits are reduced or discounted to take into account the fact that you will be receiving them before your normal retirement date. And that discount, it can be 3, 4 or 5% maybe each year, so that if you retire, say 5 years early, for example, say you wanted to retire at 55 rather than your normal retirement age of 60, the benefits can be reduced by as much as 20 or 25%. So it's quite a reduction, so that's something to bear in mind. But of course you are receiving the benefits earlier than your normal retirement date. Similar, if you want to retire late, most schemes allow it. Not all, but most schemes would allow a late retirement. And again, then your benefits will continue to increase in line with a revaluation factor, often inflation, until the point at which you come to take benefits. I think what's quite important, because all schemes are different, it's very important to check with the scheme trustees or the administrators of your scheme to see what your scheme will allow in terms of early retirement or late retirement.
With all that we hear about in the news, is my pension safe?
Carol mentioned earlier about how it's an occupational scheme. So the employer, your old employer or your current employer, depending on whether you're an active member or not of the DB scheme, they have responsibility to fund the pension for forever, for well into retirement. So there's a risk there that the employer may not be able to meet its funding criteria. It may not be able to provide enough money to support all the pensioners, whether now or in the future. Fortunately, there is something called a pension protection fund that when a scheme does fall into default, when an employer is no longer solvent, will look to take a scheme on. However, there is limits in regards to the amount of benefits that they will pay, and they also have limits in regards to the increases that they will pay in retirement. So you may not get as much once the scheme is in the pension protection fund as if the scheme was not. So it's really important, therefore, that you understand the limits that there are and understand whether you would be directly affected or not if the scheme did go into the PPF.
Thank you. And what happens to my pension if I die?
There should be a dependent's pension paid. Again, depends on the scheme rules as to how much that is. But if your member pension, so you're entitled to your own member pension, in the event of your death, your dependent should receive maybe a half or maybe 2/3 of that pension for their lifetime. So it doesn't just stop. It would go to a dependent, typically a spouse. Sometimes there are children's benefits also payable. They will normally stop though when the child ceases being in full-time education or reaches age 23, whichever happens earliest. So children's pension benefits, again, would be paid at a reduced value to a member's pension and say that paid for a finite amount of time. But a dependent's, normally a spouse's pension or a partner's pension, will be paid for the duration of their lifetime. Again, what's quite important to look at are the scheme rules to see what limitations, potentially, if any, they put on a dependent's pension. Sometimes, for example, if they'll pay a spouse's pension, it might be that the spouse had to be your spouse at the point you left the scheme rather than at point of death. That's something to check. Same-sex partners also, not all scheme rules have been updated and hence not all schemes will pay pensions to same-sex partners. So it is very important really to, again, as part of the investigation process into what benefits you have and what they will pay to you and your dependents in the event of death, to speak to the scheme administrators and find out what the scheme will pay.
Thank you, Chris and Carol. And thank you for watching. That brings us to the end of episode 1 of our 3-part mini-series, Defined Benefits in Focus. We look forward to seeing you in episode 2.